Okay, I'm about to let everybody in. We got 24 waiting.
All right.
Here we
Let's
go.
do it. Hello, everyone. Oh, this is wonderful. Hi. As you guys come in, we are going to do introductions in just a minute. We want to be able to give some time for people to join in. But if you can type in the chat your name and where you're from, and maybe what you do, just for us to get to know you all a little bit. UK art therapist. Woo! It's 12 a.m. there. Oh my goodness. Thank you for joining us.
Wow, that's amazing.
I appreciate that. I feel like we need some background music. Awesome. Oh, I'm seeing so many names. I see you, Erin. I see you, Deborah, Cindy, Peta, Lily. So many people from so many parts and walks of path. This is wonderful. Awesome. I know that some of you may have registered within the past few days, but there was an email that was sent out that you may have not have gotten. But if you have any questions that you would like for us to address throughout this evening, please feel free to send a private message to Sam, and she will be able to ask it anonymously so that we can try to get to it, okay? And Sam, would you mind doing like a 15-minute reminder for us? Thank you. I'm gonna browse through the chat. Hi, my CHA family, Children So Many. We got people from DC. Oh, we got some people from SGA. Hello there. Wonderful. We're excited to have you. Welcome, welcome. Samaya, greetings, welcome.
Hi.
So I see someone asked, will there be resources to download? We will be going over that at the end, but we are going to be putting together resources, and we are also going to be recording this where just the two speakers will be recorded, and you'll be able to have access to view it at your leisure. Because this is important work. You're welcome, Mia. I'm so moved. This is wonderful. Cindy, did you pass this along to people from SGA? This is awesome.
I didn't, but they found out.
Really?
I'm sorry.
Oh.
I wanted
No,
to keep
I love it. So SGA is I guess there's no really like abbreviation for it, but it's an organization here in Chicago, and I used to be a consultant for them when I worked with immigrants who experienced trauma right from crossing the border. So I did some art therapy and dance movement therapy. So it's just a pleasure to see people from all walks of life. Thank you, Megan. All right. Welcome, Dr. Joe. 605, 606, perfect. Well, Dr. D, may I hand it over to you to introduce yourself?
Yes. So first of all, of course, thank you for having me, Christina. I was so excited at the invitation of just getting to collaborate with you on a topic that I think is very important, because the reality is so many of us either personally have experience with or know someone who has experience with trauma. So I was very excited to get a chance to kind of talk about how trauma manifests in relationships. Just to kind of briefly introduce myself, my name is Dr. Diona, and I am a psychologist working in sunny South Florida. And I'm so happy to be here with you guys tonight, and I'm looking forward to our presentation.
Yes, thank you. And I'm honored to be able to have this experience and opportunity with you, and that you are open. That, you know, just manifested in itself. And it seems like it was the perfect time to put this together. So
Agreed.
I am excited to share that my name is Christina, and I am the CEO and founder of Fontanelli Art. And I am a mental health consultant. I am a yoga teacher. I'm a Zumba teacher, art therapist, dance movement therapist. I do a lot of things, but it's all under the umbrella of mental health and creative wellness. I am really, really wanting to be conscious of the topic of what we're talking about, and how this may be challenging for some to listen to, as we may bring awareness to certain areas of their life, or maybe someone that they've worked with or someone who's close to them. So I thought that we should start with a small mindfulness activity, just to prepare our bodies and our minds for the topic that's coming up. So if you have your camera off, please feel free to keep them off. If you have your camera on, I encourage you all to just take a moment to lean back into your chair, dropping your shoulders, taking your eyes off of the screen. So either lowering your chin down, letting your head drop, or if you can, move your phone or computer to a different direction, and just take a moment to reflect on how you feel. Reflect on your day, whatever you may have just transitioned out of to be here with us in this moment. I invite you to relax your shoulders a little bit more and allow the chair or whatever's behind you to support you. Placing both feet flat on the ground, maybe dropping your hands to your thighs. We're going to take a couple breaths together. Inhale through your nose. Exhale through your mouth. Again, inhale. And exhale. One final breath. Big inhale. Holding for 3, 2, 1. Exhale. Slowly flickering your eyes open. I invite you to take your hands and just reach up above you. Reaching your fingers nice and long. Going from side to side. Waving your hands in the air like you just don't care. Coming back down. And let's just do a couple shoulder rolls backward. I know I tend to hold a lot of stress and tension in my neck and shoulders. I don't know if that may be for you, but it's always tight. One more time. Inhale up. Exhale, relax. Rotate forward. One more time. Dropping in. Exhale down. Maybe do a couple some neck rolls too. From side to side. Going to the other side. And coming back to center. Let's take one final collective breath. Inhale in. And exhale. Please remember that throughout this experience that you're going to have with us, we really want you to take care of yourself. If anything seems a little bit challenging or maybe bringing things up to the surface, just take a moment and maybe grab some water, go to the restroom, step out of the room. Do what you need to take care of yourself. You don't have to take this all in at once. Like we said, we're going to send it to you. So be able to digest it as you're capable, okay? All right. Awesome. Thank you. So, Dr. D, trauma. Where do we start?
I mean, maybe a good place to start is just to talk about what trauma is. I mean, I'm pretty sure most of us have, a basic idea of what it is.
Yeah.
But in the case of mental health, when we talk about a trauma, it is when you go through an experience, whether personally or you witnessing it, that leads you to feel that your life is in danger or that you are not safe. So, of course, this can be anything from physical abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, witnessing domestic violence between your parents or loved ones, being raised in a crime-ridden neighborhood or in a war zone, experiencing a natural disaster, being sick at an early age and having to have multiple surgeries. Anything that leaves you feeling like you are not safe and that your life is in danger or at risk can lead you to experience a trauma.
Yes. And so to bring in the dance movement therapy of how trauma can impact the body, trauma can be stored within us. Trauma can happen and we can be unconsciously processing it and storing it. And so an example would be, I had a client who was in a domestic violent relationship and her husband would grab her here before anything would happen. And so anytime anyone would come too close to this part of her body, it was a trigger.
Yep.
And now at that moment, she wasn't able to identify why she didn't like being touched, why she didn't feel comfortable with people being on this side of her. But we were able to talk through and say, well, yeah, when anything gets close, your body says danger. It's going to happen.
Exactly.
We need to protect ourselves. And that's when the visceral experience of the heart and the breath and the mind, and you go into survival mode.
Yes.
So I think we're going to be doing a really good balance of what the trauma is, but also what happens within the body at the same time. Right?
Yeah, when you talked about the example of him grabbing her arm, it reminded me of how when you experience a trauma, your body goes into fight, flight, or freeze mode. So anything that is a trigger, in this case, people getting close to her, people grabbing her, or people touching her, without even thinking about it, her body will already send a signal to the brain, you are in danger. And then she will, of course, experience the fight, the flight, or the freeze response. And that happens to so many of us where we have a trauma history, whether from childhood or adulthood. And when those triggers happen, our body immediately responds.
And sometimes we don't have the words to communicate to other people, hey, I have some history, I'm uncomfortable, because there may be a disconnect. So for example, with this particular person, they didn't make 2 and 2 add together. And so she was constantly getting triggered, but she didn't have the words to share that she needed safety and protection.
Yes.
which was really a boundary. That's what she needed to set.
Mhm. That makes sense too when we think about it. A trauma usually includes a violation of your boundaries. So, for example, if a person is molested at an early age by a family member, growing up, you think family is supposed to look out for me and protect me. So when that boundary is crossed, it really makes you question every other, rule that you had in your head about the world, about family, about safety, and so on and so forth.
Yes, and I think it's also important to incorporate family and culture and collective, right? So we have different layers of trauma. So we have trauma that could be a one-time incident, maybe a car accident. 9/11 is another example. But then you also have complex trauma. So it's a
Yes.
repeated cycle of the same trauma, which happens a lot to children, can happen to anyone, but mostly children witnessing, abuse, violence in the household, maybe with siblings or anything like that. And then you also have racial trauma, historical trauma, right? So people who identify as Black and Brown in the United States, we're all going through a collective trauma. Just our skin color is a trigger to people.
Yes.
So we have a heightened awareness. We're hyper vigilant in certain areas, constantly looking around, constantly looking at, spaces that we're in. Because of the trauma that we've seen with the Black Lives Matter, seeing police violence, but also even violence within our own community and spaces. So I think that it's important to note that although we have the umbrella of trauma, it's very, very complex, very
Oh
complex.
yeah, definitely. It's multi-layered, and I like how you mentioned the different types of trauma that people can experience. When it comes to cultural trauma, you mentioned one that I think most of us here are probably familiar with, 9/11. That's something that has changed and shifted the way that we viewed the world to think that there are people out there who might want to harm us as Americans. Then, of course, the collective trauma, as people of color, the way that you perceive the world and the way that the world perceives you, how that can be a trigger for you as well. And then there's also trauma in the family. So let's say, for example, you grew up in a family where domestic violence was the norm, where your dad beats up your mom or your mom beats up your dad. Maybe you grew up in a family with a history of incest. It was known that cousins did things together, parents and children did things together, siblings did things together. Maybe you grew up in a family where trauma was something that everyone knew about, but nobody talked about. So all of those things, they just get passed down from generation to generation. And that's why it's so important for us to have the conversation that we're having now.
Yes, and I think that it's very challenging when you are the one in your family who may have became conscious of what was happening, and now you want to have the conversation, but it's really hard. And so I'm going to pass it over to Sam because I know we got a question that was similar to that topic in regards to how do we bring that conversation to the family in a way where they don't feel threatened or attacked.
Yeah, there's a question. We had some people submit them before this event tonight. You can also still continue to private message them to me in the chat, and I'll make sure they get asked. But the question was, how can I begin to have the conversation with family about past trauma safely when it was perpetrated by a family member?
That's a tough one, but it's definitely a good question.
I think there's a lot of different routes to that. I think that first and foremost, it needs to be processed within the person first. That the person who experienced or witnessed it, even secondhand trauma, that's another layer of just the experience. Being able to understand what happened, put the pieces together, a timeline, understand the impact that it has on them. Because I think that it could be a little bit dangerous to like have the trauma and then try to go to the source and then they retaliate and maybe they say it was your fault, or maybe they say,
Mhm.
that wasn't a big of a deal. And so that can lead to a lot of confusion. And so I think just being able to understand and process just the bare minimum. You may not be 100% healed at that point in time, but to have the tools to reground yourself, whether that means walking away, whether that means going to a different space, or maybe you don't have to unpack the entire thing, but little by little with someone that you feel safe.
I'm so glad you made that point, Christina, about starting with you actually processing the trauma, because the reality is, if, let's say, for example, you have not processed your trauma, you've never gone to therapy, you've never talked about it with anyone, and then the first time that you decide to bring it up, it's to tell a family member about the abuse you endured, and let's say, God forbid, they don't believe you. Or let's say they accuse you of asking for it or doing something to facilitate that. It can be very re-traumatizing because you already haven't processed and dealt with the trauma. Now you have this person invalidating your feelings and experiences. So I definitely completely second what Christina said. It is important for you to have worked that out on your own, preferably with a therapist who is well versed in dealing with trauma, because not only will they help you to process what happened, they'll help you to, name the different emotions that you experienced and how that made you feel in that moment, allowing you to actually express it. If you feel the need to cry, cry. If you feel the need to punch something, punch something. They normalize all of that for you. And then a lot of therapists will also do almost a kind of stress inoculation training where they prepare you for when you talk to your family members. If they respond like this is how you'll respond. Or if they are disbelieving, this is how you'll handle that. So that way, it's like you have a toolkit of the different things that you can do so that you can have that conversation with the confidence that no matter what happens, you are going to be okay.
Yes, yes. And I think that's beautiful to understand that with the different tools, also looking at your experience on a spectrum, right? I think that we do a lot of comparing in our society of, well, mine's
Yes.
is worse than yours, or well, it wasn't that bad, so you shouldn't, complain about it or say anything about it. You should just brush it, under the rug. And I think that if we begin to look at it, on a scale that is even, that one is not worse than the other, one is not better than the other, but just understanding that what is. Your
Yes.
trauma is your trauma. And if you
Yes.
look at it from a psychological and scientific way, 9/11 happened, which was one incident, but it
Mhm.
impacted everyone differently.
Yes.
So know that one particular trauma that you have been exposed to is not going to look the same in the next person or in someone
Mhm.
else in your family, because we all cope differently, right? And so if you are having these conversations, even if it's not with family members, but maybe loved ones or friends, but understanding that they may not admit that it was a traumatic situation, but that should not invalidate how it made you feel. It should not invalidate how it impacted you, whether anyone else acknowledges it or not. That is your right, and that is your experience. And I think that a lot of people struggle, well, like if it's sexual assault, or like, well, maybe it wasn't, or maybe I did put myself in a situation. And I think that we need to begin to look at it from a different perspective of how were you directly impacted, and what can we
Yes.
do to move forward from it.
Mhm. Yeah, very good point. And then also, if you don't feel comfortable having that conversation one-on-one, you can even talk to your therapist about bringing that person into therapy to talk about what happened. So that way, it's almost like as if you have a neutral party or a mediator there. If it's difficult for you to kind of express yourself, or if you're concerned about how the person will respond and you want to make sure that it's a safe place for yourself and maybe even for them if you love and care about them, you can bring that person into a session with your therapist and talk about it there so that you're in a safe place while you talk about that.
Absolutely. And in a world that would be perfect, that would be the best way to process it. But
Mhm.
with the families that, I think that she and I have both worked with,
Mhm.
even getting therapy is still something that we're trying to work on in certain cultures, right? That it's okay to not be okay, that it's okay to not have it together, and that it's okay to see a therapist. So to even begin that process, first we have to say it's okay to admit that you don't have it all together, and that you have these struggles, and that you have challenges. And maybe you never get that person into therapy with you. How do we begin to process that this may be a journey for you to experience in your own time, in your own way? And looking at what are some alternative ways people are seeking therapy if they can't afford a therapist, because not everyone has access to insurance, or, you know, to even be in contact with anyone. So we have a lot of community spaces that are trying to hold a safe space for these conversations. But I do want to transition a little bit about how does this impact you in other relationships, like friendships, professional interactions with maybe just other people. What are your thoughts on that?
I definitely think one of the things that we have to remember about a trauma is that emotionally speaking, you become stuck at the place where the trauma occurred. So not necessarily the physical place, but in terms of those emotions of shock, of confusion, of betrayal, and of disbelief. So what often happens in our relationships with other people, whether it's family members, whether it's coworkers, whether it's a new relationship, we operate under the assumption this person is going to hurt me. It's just a matter of when. So what happens is when you're operating under the assumption that this person is going to hurt me and it's just a matter of when, you are actively looking for things to be wrong in the relationship. Or if there actually is something wrong in that relationship, it becomes magnified. Why? Because emotionally you are stuck at the point of the trauma and you are looking out for betrayal. You are looking out for disappointment. You are looking to be hurt by that person. So one of the ways that trauma tends to manifest in our relationships is it colors the way that we view the people that we interact with on a regular basis. So let's say, for example, you grew up in a household that was emotionally and verbally abusive. If, let's say, for example, you interact with someone who teases you one day at work, you may have an explosive reaction because that's a trigger for you, whereas the coworker may have a, oh my God, what is their problem? You know, I was just making a joke. So one of the ways that trauma manifests in our relationship is that we are always looking out for the other shoe to drop, always looking out to be hurt, and then it ends up either magnifying the little problems or we find little things to pick on, and to kind of keep ourselves from getting hurt, we self-sabotage our relationships.
Yes, and through self-sabotage, we have coping mechanisms that we put into place to protect yourself, right? And so we should all be guarded. We should all be, you know, aware of who we're allowing into our life, how much we're sharing, what roles people play. But I think that we begin to go into a space where there's a brick wall. And everyone goes behind that wall, right? As opposed to like a cage where, you know, a bird cage, for example, where, you know, you can see through, you can assess, you can open the door and you can choose when you go through that door. But the problem with the wall is that you're also enclosing yourself in as much as you're trying to protect and keep people out. And I think being able to have a resource, have a community to begin not demolishing the wall all at once, because we do need to have very realistic ways of low level of stress. Like when you're crossing the street, you want to be able to be aware. You want to be able to be conscious of the area. You want to be able to know, like, who can I trust and who can I not? But taking the process of one brick at a time.
Yeah.
One step at a time. I do want to transition over to Sam. I believe she had a question for us.
I have another question. I'll put both of these in the chat. You guys can look at them, but I just wanted to present one that was sent beforehand. It's kind of along the same vein about healing from relationships in the present with trauma, but how can I foster a safe and fulfilling relationship with future partners while healing from past traumas, especially when it's connected to building a healthy sexual or intimate relationship?
That's a very good question. I think to start, one of the things that you have to recognize, if you do have past trauma, especially that is related to like sexual abuse or intimate partner violence, it's going to take some work, not only on your part, but on the part of your partner for you to heal that trauma. So, one of the mistakes that sometimes people make is they think that a partner getting into a new relationship is going to fix the problem, and that's not true. You really have to get into therapy. Hopefully, if you can afford therapy or if you have insurance, get into therapy to work through the trauma. And if you're already in a relationship, a good partner will support that work. So, a good partner will not say things like, "Oh, I'm not your ex. Why don't you trust me?" A good partner will recognize it's because you were hurt so much by your ex that you are very distrusting or maybe even abrasive sometimes in the way that you respond. And a good partner takes it upon themselves to figure out, what can I do to help? How can I make you feel that this is a safe space? So you work on it in therapy. The therapist may sometimes encourage you to actually bring in the partner over time for a couple of sessions here and there to address what are the main barriers that are keeping you from feeling that this is a safe space.
Yes. And I think with safe space is understanding the intention of why we're seeking relationships. Are
Mhm.
we looking for someone to be that safe space for us in exchange for us to not have to be it for ourselves? I think that there's many components of what safety looks like. It can be basic necessities, running water, food, a home. Maybe it's a relationship or a community of people where you can go to for things. I believe that people who have experienced, not just sexual trauma, but any type of trauma within a intimate personal relationship, that there are cycles, right? And
Yes.
so if there's a cycle and you find yourself going from relationship to relationship to relationship to relationship, there is a common denominator, and there is a need that is looking to be met. And that's not
Mhm.
bad. Everyone desires to be held, to be loved, to be touched, to be seen, to be validated, and that's okay. But it's also being able to have the transparency to communicate what is going on. A tactic that I recommended for a lot of clients that I work with is like a safe word. So an example could be pineapples, banana. It could be a color, whatever it is. But if you know that you're about to bring up something really challenging
Mhm.
and the person that's going to receive it does not know that the conversation is going to shift there, initially they're going to become defensive. They're
Mhm.
going to feel attacked. And that part of the brain that you need them, that prefrontal cortex to be able to receive and process information, is going to shut down. And they're going to go to another part of the brain and defend and defend and defend. But that's not effective. And this happens in friendships. This happens in siblings and family members. So what is the first thing you think of when someone tells you, we need to talk?
It
What
has a
did I
negative
do?
connotation.
You get sweaty, you get nervous, even if it's your boss, if it's a friend, if it's a parent. You're like, okay, what did I do wrong? What's going to happen?
Mhm.
And so being able to help that person shift and say, you know pineapples,
Mhm.
something happened and I kind of want to talk about it.
Mhm.
um, and I'll go a little bit and then I'll transition it back. When we're communicating and we have experienced trauma, we have to look at the body. We have to look at how we're standing, our tone of voice, our facial expression. All of that is a part of the communication. All of that is delivering a message. And if we're in a defensive stance and we're looking angry and we're pacing and we're moving, that's hard to really be able to hear the words that are trying to come across clearly.
Mhm.
But that takes work. That takes a lot of self-awareness. Yeah.
Yeah.
While you guys are on the, sorry to hop in, kind of like moderate, but while you guys are
Yeah.
on the topic of the body, we had a question that came in during the session so far. That was, can we talk more about how trauma is stored in the body and how we can release it? So it's more general,
Mm.
but I'm just going to pop that in while you guys are kind of on that route
You
already.
want to open and then I'll close with it?
Oh yeah, sure.
Okay.
So when it comes to trauma being stored in the body, number one of the things that we have to remember is trauma changes the brain. So it's not just that trauma is stored in the body, it actually changes things inside of your brain, specifically the hippocampus, where memories are stored, the amygdala, where emotions and fear are processed, and then the prefrontal cortex, which is where decision making happens. So when you experience a trauma and you experience, let's say, PTSD or maybe even complex PTSD, it has long-term effects. Then going back to what I said earlier, when you experience a trauma, you get emotionally and psychologically stuck there. Anything that involved your body, whether it was an arm grab, like Christina mentioned earlier, whether it is being shoved, whether it is witnessing people throwing objects and you flinching, all of those things are stored in the body as memories. So, how many of you guys, and you don't have to unmute your mics, but just a question, have driven home from work and then you look up and you're home and you don't even remember getting there? Right? We've all done that. We've had that experience where you're kind of like, wow, I just left the job, but I'm already home. What happened? Muscle memory. Your body knows, all right, we're going to turn left on First Street, and then we're going to turn right on 47th Court, and then my house will be the third from the left. In that same way, if you are exposed to trauma, it has a strong emotional impact and that will stay in your body unless it is processed. And then if you have multiple traumas that you've experienced, it can stay in multiple parts of your body and it can manifest as tension. It can manifest as fatigue. It can manifest as insomnia. It can manifest in actual heart palpitations, heart racing, shakiness. So it can manifest in multiple ways.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of the ways in which it intakes and it sits in the body, sometimes the way we express it has to do with how we learn to express our emotions, what we witnessed growing up as children, how we saw our parents get upset or express happiness or joy or confusion. A lot of that has to do with the unconscious tapping into, this is what we've witnessed, let's pick this to try to use that as a coping mechanism. And really understanding that there can be a level of disassociation with our body. And that is just, the body needs to protect itself so much that it shuts down that part of your body in order to keep you from feeling nervous, from feeling anxious. So going back to that example of the arm and the client and the domestic violent relationship, a level of disassociation can be just numb, completely numb. And not understanding, well, how come when I do this movement, it doesn't feel the same as this side? Now, we're all naturally going to feel different experiences from our right and from our left, but being able to identify, has trauma been stored in my body to the point of protection that now I no longer understand, or I'm hearing the cues that my body is telling me, right? And so that's another level of work that takes a lot. And this happens a lot commonly with those who have experienced some type of sexual abuse or rape, that they may have become disconnected from that part of their body. And so they may look for other ways to heal, maybe through the same behavior, but they're going numb. And so that goes back to cycles and how trauma can manifest and be expressed through different ways in our lives that just get repeated over and over and over until we can put our hand in and say, wait a minute. What is going on? What am I doing? What is the need that needs to be met? An example of this can be with those who maybe have had a trauma and have a hard time at different jobs or working with particular bosses or supervisors, micromanaging. This can come up a lot, not being liked, being told what to do, or being asked a lot of questions. Where were you? Where's this report? Why didn't you do this? Just having that presence on you. And then maybe you quit and you go to another job, and then it happens again. You quit, you go to another job, it happens again. You're in a relationship with a friend, they do this, you disconnect from them. Then you find another friend, it happens again. it's a cycle. It's a cycle. Would you like to speak to that cycle?
Yeah, even when you mentioned the whole dissociation piece, one of the things I wanted to point out, dissociation can be seen as adaptive because it's your body trying to protect you, but it becomes a problem when you're doing it too much. So, not just the dissociation, but disconnecting, where the minute you have conflict in a relationship, you immediately disengage and move away. What happens is you get stuck in a cycle because conflict is a part of life. You are going to have disagreements. You aren't always going to get along with everyone in your life. So if you get into the habit of running away, it makes it harder for you to learn healthy and adaptive ways of coping with that stress. And then add to that, when we were talking about, the cycle of trauma and how it manifests in relationships, another thing that we sometimes see is trauma bonding, where people don't even recognize that even though they have bonded with someone, it's not in a healthy way. So a lot of times what happens is you occasionally get positive reinforcement from that person. They do occasionally give you glimpses of the old them, the one who bought you flowers, the one who took you out on dates, and so on and so forth. And then you keep thinking, that person is still in there. Maybe if I do less of this, maybe if I do more of this,
Mhm.
that person will show up again. And what often happens is it's just a cycle, honeymoon, next thing you know, the abuse happens. They convince you that they've changed, and then it just starts over and over and over again. So you really have to have some level of awareness of what is going on in your life or with that particular person so that you can figure out what steps do I need to take to disconnect from unhealthy relationships and instead work on the more healthy connections.
Yes, yes, that's really good. That trauma bonding relationship. I think that that can happen in particular because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very sensitive time
Yes.
for us to have a heightened level of our needs
Mm-hmm.
to just be reaching out to anything and anyone that might satisfy you in that way.
Yes.
Um, and to know that there's a healthy balance of being able to relate and connect with other people by going through this shared experience, but then also looking as a form of escape or
Mm-hmm.
looking as a form of denial of what it is that's happening within the trauma, whether it's collective or whether it's a personal. I know we've talked a lot about, communicating and expressing, but not everyone may even be at that point. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think it's also important to note that when a person may be experiencing a trauma, but they don't have the words, they are going through an internalized cycle where maybe they can't even say, well, how come you're not doing this? Or, it bothers me that this happened. Can we change that? Then they're in themselves and their thoughts are the things that are just ruling them. Well, it's your fault that this is happening. Well, why didn't you say anything? And that negativity of putting the blame on yourself when that's not the case. You can't save yourself if you're drowning. You may need someone to help you. You may need that assistance if the waves are just a little bit too challenging for you to see and orient yourself to what's going on. And so being able to work through self-compassion and pushing away that shame and guilt, especially from a cultural perspective, where
That's
it's even
huge.
hard to have the conversation, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, add to that if you have anything.
Yeah, definitely. What I was going to add, when you use the example of drowning, I actually think that's one of the worst things about trauma is it makes us feel like a victim who has no resources to cope with what happened. So not only is there the guilt and the shame component, but there is also a sense of there's nothing I could do. I have no control. This happened to me. This is the end of life as I know it. And it is very disempowering. So, one of the things that is important to keep in mind, first of all, you're not a trauma victim, you're a trauma survivor because there are so many people out there who continue to see themselves as a victim. And when you see yourself as a victim, then that means you have no control and there's nothing you can do to address what happened to you. As opposed to if you take the empowering perspective of, I survived, you know? So many people have experienced trauma, and I survived what happened to me. I survived the assault. I survived witnessing my dad stab my mom. I survived Hurricane Irma. I survived all of these different things. And then that puts you into more of a headspace to problem solve, to figure out what can I do to change my life for the better? Because no one should have to go through life constantly feeling like a victim. It's so disempowering. You need to have some sense of power and agency to know that even though this person did this horrible thing to me, I can come out the other side.
Absolutely, absolutely. Um, to go along with that analogy of being in the water, you know, swimming isn't necessarily bad. Swimming can be enjoyable. It can be a great thing in the right context, in the right space where you feel like you've gone far enough in the water, whether it's a pool, the ocean, anything like that. And I think that there's some perspectives of, well, it's my fault. I went too far. I should have known better than to go into this relationship or to allow this person to say that or to put myself in a cycle. And so that's where some of the thoughts go into that. But what about the other perspective of kind of like normalized trauma that we've talked about? So maybe you grew up in poverty. Maybe you grew up, you know, having to share a bed or a room with someone. Or maybe you're used to not having a meal. Or you're used to having all these challenges. They were normal to you. And so being able to say like, well, I didn't choose for this to happen. This was the life that was given to me. And that would be a level of someone just falling overboard. And it's like, this is just what it is. I'm comfortable here. I like drowning. Drowning is actually stable for me. It's when I'm not drowning that I'm uncomfortable. I'm unsure of the unfamiliar because I've been drowning my whole life.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you made the point about the people kind of feeling like they swam out too far. Culture plays a major role in terms of how trauma survivors conceptualize what happened to them, because sometimes family members, whether well-meaning or not, say or imply that you were somehow to blame for what happened. So it's like you're already struggling with the fact that I have experienced sexual abuse, psychological abuse, neglect, physical abuse, or whatever it is. So then when a family member says to you, well, you shouldn't have done this, or you shouldn't have done that, or what were you thinking? It further makes us feel like as if, you know what, I'm to blame. If only I hadn't done X, this wouldn't have happened. As opposed to recognizing the trauma has happened, you are never at fault or to blame. Leave that for the perpetrator, and instead let's figure out what steps do we need to take to help you to swim again and not feel like as if you are completely helpless and powerless.
That was great. That was really great. Thank you. Sam, do you have another question for us?
Yes, this is awesome so far, I have to say. I just want to bring one last question to mind here. I know there's a lot of awesome questions that are in the chat. But we want to honor your time and try to wrap by 7 also. So more of a hopeful twist on this, but how important is feeling the emotions trauma can bring up, and what are resources that can help me do that safely? Or if you guys have any other last empowering zhuzh to give us, because I'm really feeling it. I'm a survivor. If you have any of that too, that'd be amazing.
Okay.
Can you read the question one more time? There's a keyword I'm looking for.
How important is feeling the emotions trauma can bring up, and what resources can help me do that safely?
Feeling the emotions. I would say to begin to even acknowledge that there are emotions is the beginning. To acknowledge that you feel some type of response to whatever the action was. Personal, professional, cultural. An example would be, Black Lives Matter. There was a collective trauma that happened for us to witness and watch that video. There was an impact for something that we visually saw and our body took in, right? And so being able to begin to just sort, what is it that I feel for the person versus what is it that I feel for myself? Because sometimes with trauma, there can be an attachment to the person, and that would belittle your own response or your own emotion. Well, I made them feel like this. Or if I speak out about it, they're going to feel really bad, or they're going to feel ashamed. And so we may push our emotions as humans and say, I don't want to feel them. And so we begin to suppress and suppress and suppress, which also begins to disconnect us from our mind, from our body, and from our spirit. And so I would say, from like an art and dance movement therapy background, sometimes words are not enough. Words may not be the starting point. A lot of the work that I used to do with youth who struggled with addiction and substance abuse, we would use music. What songs can resonate and make you feel a certain type of way? What artwork, what poetry, what book, what clothing, anything that might be tangible, something that can just say, yeah, that's it. I feel something when I see that or when I read that. And I think starting there with being able to find unique ways, even if it's cooking, gardening, those are areas and ways that you can just begin to engage in an activity that's like mindless, right? Where you have that muscle memory kick in, and then you begin to create a space of like, well, I like when I do this. Why do I like when I do this? Because I remember this and this and this, but I don't like this. You know, it just allows for a very creative and non-traditional way to begin processing little by little. Again, trauma will not be solved in one session. It may take 1 week, 1 year, 25 years, 2 days. And even though there may be one specific trauma, again, everyone's gonna receive and process that differently. So please, 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 if I can share anything with you all, please do not put a time frame on your healing process. Do not, feel like, well, it happened years ago or it happened months ago. Why am I not over it yet? Why is it taking so long? I think that does more damage and adds to the flame versus finding a nice, calm candle where you can sit and ebb and flow with whatever emotions come up.
Yeah. The last thing that I would add just to what you said, which I completely agreed with, what we have to recognize, the emotions that we experience following a trauma are a normal response to an abnormal event. Normal response to an abnormal event. Your emotions of fear, anger, guilt, shame, all of those negative emotions are normal responses to an abnormal event. So the reason why it is important to feel those emotions is it allows you to process and then change the narrative, okay? So what a good trauma-informed therapist will do, not only do they have you talk about what happened, to talk about what you were thinking, what you were feeling, the sensations, the experiences, because then after you have processed that, you get to change the narrative. So it's not just this thing happened to me and I was just a hopeless bystander just sitting there experiencing it. You actually get to change the narrative of what happened to you so you come out as a survivor as opposed to a victim. So that to me is the reason why it is important to feel those emotions and to not judge or criticize yourself for feeling those emotions. The emotions are a normal response to an abnormal event.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I saw a question that was in the chat that I want to address really quickly. What if the person says that she doesn't have emotions? I would say the most transparent way for me to respond to that is to share a little bit that I also struggle with this. Given the trauma that I have witnessed and experienced in my own life, but also with the clients, violence, attacks, I have a hard time feeling emotions. And the work that I'm doing with my therapist is recognizing when the emotions begin to surface, what do I do to suppress them? Everyone has emotions. I don't like to say whether they're positive or negative, they just are. It's about what you do with that emotion that causes the behavior to be a positive or negative one. It's okay to feel anger. It's okay to feel confused. It's okay to feel that. But I think it's beginning to recognize when you feel something, where do you go? So I know for me personally, I'll try to talk my way out of the emotion. I will literally be bringing up and start choking up and have tears. And then I will mentally begin to process and say, on this day, at this time, this is what happened. And I begin to suppress. And so I encourage you all to take notice of, we feel something, but we quickly shut it down. Try to notice what behaviors, actions, or thoughts come up as soon as you feel that visceral experience. But this takes a lot of practice. This takes a lot of work, and maybe even bringing in close friends and family members to help you and make those safe observations of like, you know, hey sis, I noticed that every time we talk about this, you tend to kind of, you know, change the conversation, or you tend to like fidget, or you get really quiet, or maybe you don't make eye contact. Having space and time to say, they're there. Why am I keeping them afar? And how am I doing that? How can you slowly begin to bring in those emotions where you don't feel overwhelmed by the wave of emotions and paralyzed? It's a very slow process.
And then the last thing that I would add to that, if a person says they don't have emotions, chances are they have so many and they've been hurt so much, they are numb. So it's not that they don't have emotions, it's that they have essentially trained themselves not to get in touch with them because it hurts too much. So as a human being, it is impossible to not have emotions. But what can happen is if you've been hurt and traumatized so much, you numb yourself so that when a person betrays you or offends you or insults you, you know, it's nothing. So that is a person who would definitely benefit from what Christina said, and just recognizing that the emotions are there for a reason. If you have numbed them, a therapist can help you work on dismantling some of the beliefs that underlie that.
Yes.
And I noticed one person, Ye Narvaez, asked about dissociation and coping strategies. I just wanted to throw out there, grounding exercises will go a long way. So just something to kind of keep in mind that can help with any dissociation is what Christina had us do at the beginning of the webinar, which is, for example, sitting in the chair, leaning back, feeling the chair around you, noticing the texture of the chair, noticing the color. Getting in tune with your five senses can help to bring you back down.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And that's actually something I would like to wrap up with as well. Tapping therapy, Mia. Yes, there are a variety of different styles of therapy that I explore. I encourage you all to explore which one's the best fit. I know that sometimes we get matched with a therapist that doesn't really like connect with us, or doesn't really just share in a way that can really resonate with you. And that's okay. That's the beautiful part of having so many different therapists, because there's different personalities, different specialties, different experiences. So I encourage you all that, like, even if one time didn't work, try again. Try, communicate, and figure out what is it that you're looking for, and be okay if it doesn't work the first time. Maybe you start with group therapy. Maybe you start with a club and a collective habit, and let that build from there, and share your story at a pace where you're comfortable. Okay. Can a person be completely healed from trauma? That's a tough question for like 2 minutes, 1 minute.
I want to just make
one or two sentences. Yeah.
One or two sentences, and I actually think just seeing your background is what kind of helped me. Can a person heal from trauma? Yes, you can recover from trauma, but it's kind of like if you have a painting that is damaged, you can actually create something different that's also beautiful. So when you experience a trauma, it kind of derails your life a little bit, but that doesn't mean that that is the end of your story. Repaint it, do something different, make
Mhm.
something new of it, and use
Yeah.
that pain for purpose.
Yes, beautiful. I would 100% agree with that. I would say, yeah, absolutely. Just change the narrative, change the story, continue the work, and just love yourself through the process. Um, it's a journey. Remember that it's a journey. Some days are going to be easier than others, but doing things like this is a great way to begin to learn and have more tools and skills. So again, I want to be mindful of everyone's time. We are looking to do this again in the near future, given the responses and interactions that we've had. So if you can just type like one word of what you got from this experience, we would love to see that. Sam has also done the great job of putting our contact information in the chat, our website, our Instagram, things like that. So please feel free to stay connected with us. Reach out to us, give us your ideas and what you took away from it. We want to be here for you. We're here for the community. So be on the lookout for more webinars coming soon. All right. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Bye.
Great webinar, loved it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Alejandra.
You're welcome. No, thank you.
Bye. It's great to see you all.
Bye, guys.
Bye. Bye, Elizabeth. Erica, thanks for the questions. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate your presence. Thank you.
It's finished.